Good evening, everyone. We are now online for our fourth class of our Revelation series. We had some real parking problems tonight, so we might have a smaller crowd. Some might not even make it in. So let's hope they get in here, but we have to go ahead and get started. I'll ask Brother Ebb if you would open with a word of prayer.
Our Heavenly Father, we humbly bow before Thee, giving Thee the honor and glory due Thy great and holy name. Our Heavenly Father, we thank Thee for this privilege, this time that we've been allowed to come to study a portion of Your Word. We pray that You'll be with the presenter tonight, that the things he has to say and show us will be pleasing in Your sight and according to the law. We thank Thee for this plan of salvation that has been revealed to us. We pray that we might earnestly contend for the faith. We ask Thee to forgive us our sins and shortcomings. When Thou send Thy Son to this earth to establish Thy kingdom, we pray, if it be Your will, that we all might receive a portion therein, that we will be able to serve You forevermore. For this is all our hope and all our desire, and we ask these things through Thy Son, Jesus the Christ. Amen.
Thank you, Brother Ebb. Okay, we're going to have a short review of last week, and then we're going to move forward into some history that we're going to start to see unfold. We've spent the last 3 weeks identifying many of the characters and players in these visions that are going to be assisting John through this journey of time. Clear through to the end of the millennial reign. And so let's go ahead and get started on that. Last week, we picked up with the last element in our opening scene that John saw, which was the 4 living creatures. And we won't spend a lot of time here because we got a lot to cover tonight. And we looked at how these 4 living creatures are actually something that has been changing through history and growing bigger and more complex from when they first come on the scene. And if we go back to where we first start to see these creatures, it was around the tabernacle in the wilderness. There was the 4 standards of Israel: the lion, the ox, the man, and the eagle. These were all the standards for the 4 camps that represented the entire group of the children of Israel. And we looked at what the lion, the ox, the man, and the eagle all represented. We won't go into that again. But they all represented something that was all going to come together to make something much bigger. Then we saw where in Ezekiel, the first chapter, the 4 living creatures are now, all 4 of those creatures are now on one body, on these cherubims with the wings. We talked about how the wings represent the sound of many waters, and it represented a multitude coming together. But they still yet even get more complex. Because when we come to this scene finally, we see that they have 6 wings and they're all full of eyes. All being full of eyes was not in the other ones. Each beast had its own individual eyes, but now there are many eyes. And we talked about how these eyes represented the glorified brethren of Christ in their numerical totality, Jew and Gentile, overseeing the affairs of the kingdom. Of course, if you were listening last week, we saw how that journey unfolded and how this thing has been constantly morphing through time. And how this is actually not in our day. This is something that will come to pass the kingdom age. And we talked about taking this whole scene that he saw with the throne and the lamps of fire and the rainbow and the 24 elders and the sea of glass and the 4 living creatures, that these symbols are things accomplished. This is the end of the story. And that's where our story of Revelations with John begins is at the ending, because he has seen the finished product of God being manifested through all that he has done. And so it was a wonderful thing that he was taking in, and we talked about what it must have been like with the lightning and the thunder and the voices that were coming from the throne, how it was probably very overwhelming to try to absorb mentally and emotionally. And the one that was sitting on the throne had the scroll, and it said, "And I saw in his right hand of him that sat on the throne a scroll written within and on the backside, sealed with 7 seals." And we talked about this scroll being written on both sides, which is unusual. Usually a scroll is written on the inside. And we talked about how the information that's in the scroll is going to have to be those within and without the covenant. And we'll start to see that when we get into the Four Horses Apocalypse, which we will be dabbling in tonight, about dealing with the nations and those of paganism and things like that, and the things that would come against them. Then he heard someone say, "Who was worthy to open this scroll?" And no one was worthy. No one was worthy. And John wept about this. And it said, "One of the elders said unto me, Weep not. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, of the root of David, hath prevailed to open the scroll and loose the 7 seals thereof." So we talked about John went for a period of time there for him to weep a lot. It must have been a process of where he was not feeling like he was not going to be able to get this understanding that was so close and so valuable and precious to him. So we talked about that a lamb appeared, and behold, and lo, in the midst of the throne and the 4 living creatures, and in the midst of the elders, stood a lamb, as it had been slain, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which the 7 spirits of God sent forth into all the earth. We talked about how this lamb, with these horns, the horns represented power, and the multiple eyes represented the perception, the spirit, the knowledge, and the wisdom that would go with him, and that he was about to take with him to open these scrolls. The scroll, as each seal would be broken, of how it would unfold. And we also talked real briefly about why, if the lion was worthy, why is the lamb doing it? Why the lamb and not the lion? And we talked about it was in the lamb state that Christ's worthiness as king was proved. It's something to think about, all this process that Christ has gone through and everything, and where we are, since we're now at the end of the reign, the millennial reign. He's now going back. And we talked about it is the lion phase, and this is something that can be a little confusing until you really think about it. It is the lion phase of Christ handing the scroll to the lamb phase of Christ, because both are present. The lion and the lamb are both there, and they both represent Christ, and they're literally interacting with each other for this purpose. So without going into a whole lot of the details, we are now going to go on a journey back through time of the events that would unfold to bring this glorious day to pass. And this is where things start to change. We've identified everyone. We have a little bit of understanding of who they are, and we realize we're at the end of it. So let's go back and start looking at how it unfolds. Now, in order to make that better understood, we're going to have to take a look at a concept that was put in place, and I have a handout here. Brother Jesse, would you give everybody one of these? These are for you to keep. Many of us who grew up in the Christadelphian body, especially I know everyone here, we grew up with this picture and of this eyeglass or telescope of revelations being stretched out. And I have to admit, I've been familiar with it all my life, but I never understood it until just a few years ago when I applied myself to it, because to me it was just something that was spread out that had all these categories listed, and I never fully grasped how this thing works of the brother, whoever put it together, and I do not know who that is, someone else may know, of how this explains the structure of Revelations. And I will say to you that if you understand this, if you come to see this, you will have a very valuable key to how everything will unfold from here. Because when you don't understand it, if you don't have this in place and in your mind, it makes Revelations very hard, because we're going to see how time overlaps. And I'm going to explain that here with, I actually brought a prop tonight. If you'll notice on there, and for those of you who here can see this, but the people at home are seeing this also. In different places here, at all these joints of this spyglass, or this telescope, as you might want to call it, we see things, the white-robed multitude, the rainbow angel, and temple in heaven. At the end of the trumpets, we see the Lamb on Mount Zion, also at that time, come up, and we see the marriage feast. All of these things are in places in time that appear to be already things that have passed. And I have to admit, when I started reading Revelations, for the first time and applying myself to it, because I didn't grasp this, it looked like to me, as you read through it, by chapter 7 and 9, you're already in the kingdom age, because we have the seals, and then we suddenly start talking about the white-robed multitude, which is the kingdom age. And when you go through the trumpet, suddenly the Lamb is on Mount Zion, something that we know is all well into the future of the kingdom age. So how does this really work? Why are these, as you can see at the bottom, it's called interspersed visions of glory to encourage believers. Now what I've done, and unfortunately our people at home cannot see this, but for the ones of you who are here, I went to help me, I bought one. I went out and got a spyglass to try to get this in my head. What is it trying to show me here? And I think you can all see this very well. If you look at this, I'll turn it this way. If you look at it, we know how this thing works. It collapses and it opens up. Well, imagine, if you will, collapsed. This is all of history from John's time to the end of the millennial reign. This is at least 29 years of history right here in this section. Well, if we were to pull out I'm sorry. Thank you. It's a little more than 29 years, yes, that's for sure. At least 2,900. Possibly it'll go to 3,000, but we don't know for sure. If you pull out each section, you can see how this time, or these events, the seals, we're pulling out and looking at those events in this period of time, all of this. And if we pull out the next one, the trumpets, we can now look at the trumpets. We can put the seals back and look at the trumpet period. And of course, also with the vials. And of course, the seven thunders are out here at the end. And I haven't quite put it up there. If you notice down here at the very end, we have the New Jerusalem, the millennial reign, peace and joy. We have the kingdom fulfilled at the very end of time that we know about. So why are all of these down here? Well, if you notice, if this is, let's just say, I'll try to put this back for you to see. If this is the seal period, and at the seventh seal, we have the white-robed multitude, or one of the visions of the kingdom age. If I was to take this and push it in, the white-robed multitude just went to where it belongs in time, if you can see that. Or I can pull it back and look at it, and I can pull this out, and I can see the rainbowed angel. But if I push them all back, they all go back to where they are in time. We're simply pulling history out and stretching it out so we can see it. And in Revelations, we've been given some of these pieces of the kingdom to understand and see and have hope. And they were, I believe, put there for the believers who lived all through these periods of time. And this is extremely important. This is the key, because as we go through, we're going to see time go back and forth. Suddenly we'll go 300, 400, 500 years, and suddenly we seem to go back 200. And you say, why? We already covered that. No, we did not cover this situation that was being dealt with. You ever heard the story, Meanwhile, Back at the Ranch? You'll be seeing a story because you can't see. There could be two stories going on at the same time, and you can only tell one at a time. And you tell this story, and you say, well, meanwhile, back here, this is happening. And all these things overlap. The seals and the trumpets, they overlap. And the vials and the trumpets, they kind of overlap. And you'll see that as we go through this. And to give you an understanding why this is so important, it just so happened this week, Leah and I were watching. Now we love to watch movies on Revelations and see how the world sees things. And it was real good in the story. It was John was receiving the revelations, the horses and the things like that. Well, when he got to the red horse, he was suddenly seeing visions of bombs dropping in the World Trade Center being exploded and things like that. Because they see it all in the future. Everything that's written hasn't even started yet. And believe it or not, the four horses of the apocalypse happened 1,700 years ago. We're going to start looking at that tonight. Why? Because when you pull history out and look at it, it makes sense. When you collapse it back, it gets a little confusing. So you have to pull these up because all these events overlap through history. But if you read it right through like a book, it looks like it can be we're all in the future because the kingdom age comes up so quickly, it must be at the end. That means there has been, since John's time, about 1,900 years of darkness, of information not unfolded. 1,900 years that nothing has happened. But he said that these things are going to shortly come to pass. So there's something wrong there. And they do shortly come to pass from John's time, place and time. And that's what's real important. And once you have this key, you'll see how Revelations gets so much easier. And it just accelerated my ability to perceive what was happening. So anyway, we will move forward now. Now, for those who may be listening who are not been around the Christadelphian teachings and things like that, we understand these things in a certain light based on how histories unfold. And I say this for the benefit of those who are watching who are not familiar with some of these things, that some of the things that you will hear and see might shake your foundation. They may be hard to hear because they don't fit with perhaps the theology that you were raised with. And I suggest to you that this is my understanding of it at this point in time. And I'm open to hearing other viewpoints. But some of the things that I will present could be a little hard for people who have not been able to grasp a lot of things that are going on. And so I ask you that even if you see some things that might be a little uncomfortable, that you hang in there to the end and you will see how it will unfold and how it does flow. That's all I can ask of you to do that. So moving forward, so we are going to see how things unfold here. One more thing here. The seals, as we will find, deal with pagan Rome. We're going to see that it deals strictly with paganism and the judgments against paganism. The trumpets deal with Catholic Rome. In other words, by this time, Constantine had come into place, and there was a universal church in place. The vials deal with papal Rome, because things get into a different place by this time. And we'll see that comes in like under Napoleon in times of that. Now the thunders, John, when he saw the seven thunders, and we get there, we'll look at it. He saw them and he got ready to write them down. And the angel said, do not write them down. They are sealed up to the kingdom age. So we still have some knowledge that is still, like John was waiting from Daniel's time, because Daniel was told to shut up the book. Now, John's been given a lot of information. Now, he's been given this one period of time, and it's called the seven thunders. And the angel said, do not write them down. Seal it up. And so we will find out what that really is. We can speculate, and I'll throw out a few speculations that the brothers have, people who have tried to get an idea what it might mean. But we really don't know 100% because it's been sealed, and we can't say we know. When God seals it, you can't know what it is. You can speculate, and for you to say, I know exactly what it is, then you're crossing a very dangerous line. So that will be revealed to us in the kingdom age, but we do get the opportunity to see how it fits in time. Yes, Brother Gerald.
You may consider that the apocalypse, dealing with the apocalypse visions, are in fact the unsealing of Daniel's book. The prophecies contained in Daniel,
Right.
prophecies, are now being unsealed or opened up for servants of deity to come to a knowledge of. Whereas Daniel, receiving it back in 600 B.C., till John received a sealed prophecy, which no one had come to comprehension of for all that time until John received this vision. So we might call this as the book unsealed, or Daniel's book being unsealed by the visions received by John.
Yeah, and you could see why he would have wept so much, because John knew that Daniel was told to seal up a book, and he had to wonder all his life, when would that be exposed? And now he had an opportunity to physically stand as if he was in literally arm's distance of this scroll, and no one could open it. So you could see the emotion that must have overtaken him. So now, with this key, we're going to start to unlock the scriptures in a way, hopefully, that will make it exciting for you and bring it to life as it has for me. So let's go now to the 6th chapter, and I'm going to ask Brother Jesse if he would come up and read that for us.
I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard, as it were, a noise of thunder. One of the four beasts saying, "Come and see." And I saw, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow. And a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer. And when he had opened the second seal, I heard the second beast say, "Come and see." And there went out another horse that was red, and power was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another, and there was given unto him a great sword. When he opened the third seal, I heard the third beast say, "Come and see." And I beheld, and lo, a black horse. He that sat on him had a pair of balances in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the four beasts say, "A measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny. And see thou hurt not the oil and the wine." When he had opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth beast say, "Come and see." And I looked, and behold, a pale horse. His name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him. And power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth, to kill with sword, with hunger, and with death, and with the beasts of the earth. When he had opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of them that were slain for the word of God, and for the testimony which they held. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, "How long, O Lord, holy and true, dost thou not judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell on the earth?" And white robes were given unto every one of them. And it was said unto them that they should rest yet for a little season, until their fellow servants also and their brethren that should be killed as they were should be fulfilled. And I beheld, when he had opened the sixth seal, and lo, there was a great earthquake. And the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood. And the stars of heaven fell unto the earth, even as a fig tree cast her untimely figs, when she is shaken of a mighty wind. And the heaven departed as a scroll, when it is rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. And the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the rich men, and the chief captains, and the mighty men, and every bondman and every free man hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains. And and said to the mountains and rocks, Fall on us, and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne, from the wrath of the Lamb. The great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand?
All right, still on. All right, thank you, Brother Jesse. Okay, we have a whole bunch of new symbols that have been brought into a focus now. Now, these aren't symbols of this magnificent room, but keep in mind what we talked about a couple of times, at least in my opinion, and there's no scripture to prove it, we're not going to leave this place, I don't think. And imagine if you've got all of this around you, and it's almost as if you're watching these things happen on a stage with all of this magnificence around you about how it's going to come to pass. That's the best way I know, and it's kind of the way it is in my mind. But I'm always open for if that can be shown otherwise. But it is an exciting concept. So, the sixth seal. What we're going to find, like in your handout I gave you there, these are going to be judgments upon pagan Rome. John is in the time when paganism has, of course, been ruling for hundreds and hundreds of years, and it's about to come to an end over the next couple of centuries. And this is the point in which we're going to see where the Roman Empire, as great as it was, as powerful as it was, starts to deteriorate within inside. We know about, like, Nebuchadnezzar's image. Nebuchadnezzar was overthrown by the Persians. The Persians were overthrown by the Greeks. But Rome was never overthrown. They fell apart from within. And we're going to start to see that, and you're going to see how there's no way they could have continued to exist. It took a while for them. It actually took, I think it's 1450-some when Constantinople finally fell. It's another 1,300-some years before Rome doesn't exist even as a place on the planet other than a city that we know of today. Well, we'll get into that. That's down the road a ways here. So let's start opening this first seal and see what comes out. He says, And I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard, as it were, the noise of thunder. And remember, in our opening scene, he's been seeing a whole lot of thunder and lightning and things like that, but he heard the noise of thunder. It's almost like God expressing his power and majesty in how he is controlling these things through his Son. And one of the four living creatures saying, Come and see. So, what we have here now, this is the most iconic symbolism that people know of Revelations. When you speak of Revelations, about the only symbol they can probably tell you about are the four horses of the apocalypse. And like I said, we've watched many shows on it where they've tried to see when this is happening, and they talk about how it represents some businessman that's going to come along in the future, and he's going to start the system of things and overthrowing the world, and everything hasn't even happened yet. But this is the first thing that's going to unfold after John's time, or maybe even has already started in his time, in some undercurrents that are going on even when he lives, because this is a very bad time for Rome. It's starting to take a turn. So the four horses of the apocalypse, which we're very familiar with, we're going to look at them in detail one by one, and each one seems to have his own agenda. If you look at this, they all have different implements, they all have different colors. It's like each one has its own mission that it's going to carry out. Brother John Thomas in Eureka said this, and I thought it was real eloquent. You got to think about it for a second. But the equestrian, which of course is someone who rides a horse, is a symbolical personage, not representative of an individual man. So it's not going to be one man doing something. So there's only going to be four people who ever really do anything in this. That's not what it means. But a class of agents blindly executing retribution upon those obnoxious to the Lamb's displeasure. So there's a class of agents. In other words, they don't realize that they're being manipulated by God. Just like Nebuchadnezzar didn't know, Pharaoh did not realize when Moses told him, for this purpose hath God raised you up to bring him glory and honor. The same power is still working in all these lesser people that we're going to look at. And some of them are very obscure to history, and I had no knowledge of any of them until I started looking at this. Now they mean a lot to me because I see how possibly God was working in their life. And I suggest to you, the brethren who have gone before me and who will go after me, we do the best we can to see how history fits with what's happened. And we're giving it our best shot. And this route that I'm going to show you seems to fit with what is happening in these scenes. All right. So, and likewise, we always see a picture of all four of them charging at us. John did not see them all at once. He saw them in successive order. So what does that mean? That each one would represent the first 4 periods of time that were going to unfold, or situations that were going to start transpiring to start Revelations to being fulfilled in this time right after him. So we're going to, I don't know how far we'll get, but we'll start with the first one here. The first seal was the white horse. And what did it say? And I saw, and behold, a white horse. And he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him. And he went forth conquering and to conquer. All right, so we have several elements. We have the horse is white. It's got to mean something. He's carrying a bow, but just a bow. He doesn't have any arrows. And he has a crown, which means he is a victor over something. So the white horse would suggest a time of righteousness going forth to conquer. Now, you might say, well, how do we know that? Because all through the scriptures, we can find things that match up and align with this to tell us what it probably is, or give us a very good direction. And I showed you this about 2 weeks ago, and we have to look at it again for just a minute. If we jump forward to the 19th chapter, which will be months from now when we get to it, and I showed you this picture a couple weeks ago, he says, and I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse. So it is a symbol that is used in the kingdom age concerning Christ and the saints. And he, that's Christ, that sat upon him was called faithful and true, and in righteousness he doth judge and make war. And the armies which were in heaven followed him upon white horses. So it's all white horses. We don't see an Appaloosa or a dapple gray or anything like that. We have all pure white horses, clothed in fine linen, white and clean. So we can use this symbology, which is in the same book, to see what might this first horse be. So we go back to it, and so we can see that it has to do with riding forth and conquering with righteousness, with that in mind. Okay. The arrowless bow, I would suggest, is a time of conquering without bloodshed, but through the word. And if you ever want to look it up, in Psalm 64:3, arrows are used to represent speech in that verse. It's interesting. It's the words that come out of your mouth and things like that can be like arrows. So, because they can be sharp and they can be painful. But look what, when we go into 2 Corinthians, I think we get a better idea of what it's trying to tell us. For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war after the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God. Now think about the first century Christians and what they were going up against and what they were trying to do. And take every thought captive to obey Christ. And that comes from the ESV. I use that because I thought it said it in a very modern way. And I think you'd find the King James has the same thing, but it was a little easier to understand. So how do we know, really? We have to look at history and see, does it line up with this horse in any way, and this rider and what he's doing? Well, Rome experienced about 80 years of peace without war after John's day. You can look at your historical... There was always skirmishes and occasional barbarian skirmishes and things like that. But they had about 80 years where Rome itself was not involved in any massive wars, like we're going to see when we get down the road here. When we get into the trumpets, it gets real ugly. It gets real ugly for the Romans. They're shrinking all the time from the barbarians. During this time, the truth spread throughout the Roman world very mightily. And we have actually, I'm going to show you proof of that from the Romans themselves. Now, I don't know if any of you are familiar with this person. His name was Pliny. You can look him up and see what he said. But he was a magistrate of ancient Rome who lived during this time and wrote of this problem to the Emperor Trajan. He was this is right in that period after John, when he actually lived right up into he was around in the last days of John. So he's writing about this time. What better communication can we have from God from somebody that was actually living in that time? And he was not a Christian. He was looking at it from the Roman pagan viewpoint. Look what he said. The number of culprits, i.e. Christians, is so great as to call for serious consultation. The contagion of the superstition has spread not only through the cities, but even the villages and the country. Now, he wasn't an emperor. He was a high man. He was a lawyer. You look him up. It's interesting to read about these guys. Okay, who is this guy if God was using him to communicate this to us? He was a very affluent person because we have his writings today that we can read. And he's getting in touch with Trajan, who was the emperor at this time, to how are we going to put this fire out? These culprits, as he called them. It was a criminal type thing. We can't stop it. It's no matter how much you persecute them. It's just like they just keep breeding and growing. To them, it was more of an infestation that was just getting out of control. Well, you can imagine, and the things that come with that, people start falling from the pagan gods. They stop worshiping. They stop giving their money to those things. You know how our money now goes to the service of the Lord. That money is not coming in. Things are being affected. It's not just some religion out here that you disagree with. It's affecting the infrastructure of Rome as it keeps growing, and there's no end in sight. So anyway, there's a piece of history that cannot be argued with about what was going on in that day. The crown, and Brother Gerald brought this up last week, the crown, this word was the Stephanos, or Stephanos, however you say that, which was the crown of victory like the ones won in the Greek games. So it's not literally a golden crown like a king would wear. It's a crown of victory. And I actually have a picture of that coming up here in a minute that we're going to deal with. Even though it was a time of peace, it was not for Christianity. Christians were struggling terribly with men like Pliny and Trajan, who were trying to stop them and things like that. And there were a bunch of others that did. Every now and then an emperor would come in who favored Christianity, and we'll look at one tonight if we get that far. I don't know if we'll get that far. But who would take the pressure off a little bit for a few years, but that's all. In the Scriptures, as the horse was a symbol of military might, Christianity was spreading mightily throughout the Roman Empire. And this is in little over 200 years from this time, it would replace paganism as the national religion of Rome. And think about paganism had been there for hundreds of years, but within 200 years, paganism has to take a back seat. It didn't fall off the map. It didn't cease to exist. But by the time we get to Constantine, when we read about it, it takes the place of paganism, and now the tables are turned. Where the Christians are in the pilot seat, and the pagans are secondary, and they're having their problems. It's amazing how it turns around in history. Anyway, that's what I have on the white horse of what that means, and I think it's only so far you can go. You could look up more stories about what was going on in that time, but history records this, and God has given us this. He's allowed these letters of these men who lived in that day to tell us that this is where to look. This is the way to go. You're looking in the right direction. That's what I believe. That's why I believe this is the continuous historical unfolding of time, not something that's always going to be in the future, and none of it has happened yet. This is continuous historical. The second seal. Yes, Brother Gerald. Want me to go back?
Yeah, the white horse itself is a symbol of Rome. Think about
Yes, it was.
Rome and its history. Its legions were always mounted with the horse.
Calvary was very
And
big.
so the horse symbol is Rome. The rider is the one who is directing this horse, so to speak, or riding it in a sense of controlling it or influencing it, which, as you mentioned, was the Christians, or the movement of Christianity. In the Roman Empire at a time of peace. The whiteness of the horse of Rome representing the peaceful time in that period of Rome's history, conducive for Christianity to spread as it did so quickly during that first seal period. So when you get to the next horses, it'll be Rome. It'll represent Rome.
Yeah, it does. This next one really does.
Yeah.
It's
So if we think about the horse as a symbol or icon of the Roman Empire, that helps us to understand then the rider as to its effect it was having upon that
the person riding.
Roman horse.
Yeah, that's very good, Gerald. Thank you. If you look at their coinage and things like that, and we'll look at a few coins along the way, especially when we get into the woman with the golden cup in her hand sitting on 7 hills. It was in their money. They carried it around in their pockets of the revelation of things that would unfold and take place. It's amazing. And those coins, some of those coins have survived. And the horse was one of them that men are riding on all the time, because it's prestige to be on the horse, because you're above everyone else and can be seen, and you're more aggressive. Be like the ancient tank. That's the closest thing they had to a tank other than a chariot was a horse. Okay, so there's their first seal has been broken in the first period of time. But time is going on. And the second seal is this horse. And there went another horse that was red, and power was given unto him that sat thereon. See, the power was given to the person, just like Brother Gerald said, the person sitting on it has this power. Was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another. This is an internal problem. And there was given unto him a great sword. So this is something that we know about, that history has really shown us of what happened to Rome. And we're about to walk in, after this 80-year period, things start to really deteriorate. But Christianity has become extremely entrenched at this point. It's still all together. It hasn't started the separation of the false church and the true church yet, but that's all going on in the background, and we'll look at that later. So here the horse is red with a great sword. Red suggests bloodshed. It's something. This doesn't look good. That someone's charging at you on a red horse with waving a sword. The word sword here, this is very interesting. It's translated machara. I believe that's the way you say it. And that word means knife or dagger. Does that start to fit with what we know about Roman internal conditions? It's the most commonly used weapon in assassinations. We know that so well, don't we? That that was one of those things where you sneak up on the guy, or you just all come at him at once. It happened a number of times. But you remember something we know so well. Remember Ehud when he went into was it King Eglon? Was that his name? And he says, "I have a message from God." And he had this dagger that actually fit down his side. I don't think it was a little sticky thing. This was something where he pushed it all the way inside of him, and he ran him through with it. But he was able to. It was something where he could move about and still carry quite an awesome weapon. Yeah, it was concealed. So this was something this wasn't something you just stuck in your boot. You see the cowboy pull that one out of his boot real quick and it dives through. This was something bigger than that, because it's a great sword. This is a character that played quite a part in these next decades that we're going to look at. And some of you have heard of them. It's the Praetorian Guard. And they started out to be a good thing, but they became a problem in that they became very powerful. The Praetorian Guard, it was a force of bodyguards used by the Roman emperors. It was set in motion about this time to protect them, a small force. It's not just a couple of guys that just walk around you like we see today, Secret Service guys. They had hundreds and thousands in their ranks, but they were the elite of the Romans. It wasn't the normal infantry guy or something like that. This is interesting. At one time, command of the Praetorians was the rank of Purgoin. I believe that's the way you say it, and it means dagger bearer. You can see how this is all fitting in. That these guys played. They didn't do all this assassinating, but they did a lot. If you read the list of how many people died at the hands of the Praetorian Guard that were the emperors in the day, it's quite impressive. Out of fear, they were given high pay and liberties. These guys got to be very good at what they did. And when you became emperor, a lot of these emperors, when they became emperor, they had these guys around them, but history had proven what they were capable of. If they don't like you, they're more powerful than you, and they can take you out very quickly and set up their own. And they did actually set up some emperors from the ranks of the Praetorian Guard. It was, you have to read the history. I don't have time to go in it, but this fits so well with what we're going to look at. So, peace for Rome was gone, and this became the era of assassinations. Because it says, and they take peace from the earth that they should kill one another. It doesn't say they're out conquering new people and taking new land. This is internal. This is all turning, and this is what brought Rome down eventually. And it took hundreds of years, but it ate away at it because no one could be trusted. And it all started under the reign of one man. This is a turning point in history. Some of you are going to be familiar with this person. I was, and it became very exciting to me. This is Marcus Aurelius Commodus. Some of you, if you're a movie buff of old Roman pictures, if anybody familiar with Gladiator, the one that came out just about 12 years ago, Commodus, recognize that face? For those of you who have watched it, the whole movie was centered around him, and it was a story based on this. It wasn't totally accurate, but his father was Marcus Aurelius, was very powerful and very loved, and there's many statues that still exist of him. But Commodus comes along, and just to go back, he was a very powerful man in his physical way, but he was a problem child. He became very paranoid. He had an attempted assassination against him, and once that happened, he became very paranoid and had no problem with taking out anybody that he was scared to death of. This fella played him very well. And if you notice the crown on his head, that's the Stephanus. That's what that is right there. He's actually wearing one, and I thought the picture just fit well. And in the movie, he's constantly surrounded by the Praetorian Guard. All the soldiers in that movie around him all the time, doing his dirty work. It's the Praetorian Guard. They're dressed differently from the infantry people. Anyway, here's a real bust of him. But he was a very powerful man. He loved the gladiator scene. He would go into the arena and he would fight beasts and things like that. You might have noticed he had a lion's jaw on his head in that picture that I just showed you, and a club. And he loved to go out there and make himself look like something, but really he was almost like a spoiled child out of control, is what he was. Once his father died, he co-ruled with his father for a while. But this is just a lot of the history. It might be small details to you, but this is a turning point in history. This is the Red Horse period, and it's very clear when it starts. Whereas the reign of Marcus Aurelius, his father, had been marked by almost continuous warfare, that of Commodus was comparatively peaceful in the military sense, was marked by political strife and the increasingly arbitrary and unpredictable behavior of the emperor himself. In the view of Cassius Dio, who lived at that time and witnessed these things, a contemporary observer of the period, his ascension marked the descent from a kingdom of gold to one of iron and rust. Now, in Nebuchadnezzar's image, how is Rome? It's iron. It's the legs of iron. It's interesting that he used the word iron, okay? Maybe it's put there for us, maybe not. But he saw the Roman Empire going from the most greatest thing under this one man to something that was deteriorating and dissolving. It was so obvious from the change. A famous comment which has led some historians, notably Edward Gibbons, to take Communist reign as the beginning of the decline of the Roman Empire. And he wrote that book, if any of you are familiar with it. Edward Gibbons, he died about the time Brother Thomas was born. He lived about 250 years ago and wrote a 5-volume thing on the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. And it had to do with this whole period. I tried to attempt to read it for this class. I got through 1 1/4 volumes. And I said, I don't have time to finish this with what I've got to accomplish. But he's very clear that this man started the decline and the fall of the Roman Empire. And that is so critical to the history of Christianity and how things were changing in the world and what God was doing. So I ask you to mark this man as a turning point. Just how Potiphar was a turning point for Joseph, and all these other people who were turning points in history. They seem like very insignificant, but it's a point where things now change and go in another direction. We're going from the white horse to the red horse, starting with this person. But he started it. He wasn't the sole writer. On December 31st, 192 AD, an attempted poisoning of Commodus, and this is not the first attempt on his life, failed, and he was strangled to death in his bath the same night. The poison didn't work, so they just went, just get rid of it. We do what we got to do. From this point on, we will see the great sword carry out its purpose. And I'm going to suggest to you also, these horses, these periods overlap. The Christianity is still growing. It didn't stop growing at the moment Commodus came on the scene. And these assassinations will continue. As we see, we won't get that far tonight. We only got a few more minutes to maybe dabble into this third seal. But these horse periods do overlap. They're not clear-cut to where, except for defining moments like this when they do start. So let's take just a few minutes and try to get through our third seal if we can. Now, you think about a guy charging at you with a pair of balances, he's not too intimidating, is he? Usually a sword, a rifle or something, but a pair of balances, it's not too intimidating. This guy's not going to do me a lot of harm. But really, it does represent a lot of harm to the infrastructure of the country. And that's what's important. But that's why he's carrying the balances. Why would someone be riding in, charging ahead with balances in his hand? Well, let's read what it says. And when he had opened the third seal, I heard the third beast say, and I see the third beast said something. We see each of these beasts, these creatures, the living creatures, interacting. Brother Gerald?
The first, the second, and third.
Okay.
The first was the lion. The
Yeah.
second was calf.
Mm-hmm.
Third living creature like the face of a man. The fourth like a flying eagle. So around the throne in
Right.
the throne vision.
Uh-huh.
And so then when the seals are open, the first beast or living creature should be not beast, but living
Yeah,
creature.
it's living creature is more accurate.
The proper translation
Right.
of that. So the lion, the first one mentioned, the first beast, was opened the first seal, and so on. So the second living creature opened the second, and the second,
Right.
third, and so on. So the first four seals were not opened by these beasts, but when they were opened, they were commented. They had something
Right.
to say about it.
Yeah, they were sort of like the guide through it, so to speak. That makes that opening vision all the more important because they're all interacting in this. Come and see, come and see, come and see. All right. It may be. You know, I haven't looked at it that far. That may be. That is the face.
Third living creature.
I would be interested sometime in a study to find out how that connects with what we're doing. That would be interesting. Good, something to think about. Another layer of revelations that you can spend a couple of weeks on of how they fit in there. But we're a stone skipping, so let's skip. And when he had opened the third seal, I heard the third beast say, "Come see, and behold, a black horse. And he that sat on him had a pair of balances in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the four beasts say, a measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny. And see thou hurt not the wine, the oil and the wine." So we can see this is dealing with money and food. This is something that nothing can survive with. You can have the greatest army in the world, but if you can't feed it, if you can't pay for things, things fall apart. Okay, so here we have the black horse with balances. We get a sense that the price for food, that should have been is R high. I wrote this today and I got RR high. I apologize for that. That's what happens when you're making this up as you go along. The price of food is going to be very high for some reason. The blackness of the horse shows the distress of the land. Black horse, there's something that's not good here. Where we could see where the red horse would be bloodshed, some fighting, but there's something different here. This isn't so much about bloodshed as a stress put on the land itself and the people. The scarcity and high prices were a result of heavy taxation on the part of the government. Now, these next two guys are part of that process, and we're going to look at it. They lived a very short period of time, but they were horrible. They're absolutely horrible. A result of the reckless lifestyle of the next two emperors. And the first one is this guy, and some of you may have heard of him. His name is Caracalla. He lived from 198 to 217 AD. You see how we're moving through time? We're now up into the early 200s for where we were when John at 96 AD, where we were. He was a bad one, a real bad one, very self-centered on his own desires. You'll find that these emperors really didn't care a thing about Rome or anything. It was whatever could feed their desires. It was flesh at its worst. This is a coin of him. He co-ruled with his brother Geta, that was his brother, till he had him assassinated. He assassinated his own, and it was his little brother. They were given, from the one before him, they both got half of it. And he took his little brother out so that he could have it all. And, you know, family bloodline means nothing because a lot of times your mother's somebody different, so you're maybe not connected. And when your father's an emperor, he doesn't have a whole lot of time for fathering skills, you know, and you got the world at your hand and the Praetorian Guard to carry it out. You can imagine how the flesh can just run rampant. And we've seen that in our dictators today, Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi. They care nothing for their own people. They'll gas and kill their own people for their own power. He lavished many benefits on the army because that's who he kept in his favor. They did very well, but that didn't help with Rome because somebody had to pay for that. Gibbon, the same one we just quoted earlier, in his work describes Caracalla as the common enemy of mankind. This is the way this is how bad he was. He's looked at as public enemy number one in our modern terms. Nobody liked him. He had no friends, but he didn't care. He had everything at his power. He was a loose cannon. This is one of the relics of his that is still standing, the Caracalla Baths. It's a bathhouse that he built. It's huge. He was able to handle like 1,500 to 2,000 people. It's a place where they go, and they sit in the nice baths and steams. Well, he raised the taxes on all the people that were going to use it, the wealthy, to build his huge bath. And this is what's left of it. We can only imagine what it looked like finished. It's an enormous structure that has survived for 1,700 years. It's still there. But somebody had to pay for this. And he just raised taxes to get all of his building projects done for his honor and his glory. That's just one thing that you can go and see. Along with taxes to cover this lifestyle, there was a great stress on the land and cruelty. He was known for the massacres of those Romans who offended him. If they didn't like him and it got out, he wiped them out. He didn't care. You couldn't have an opinion and make it a problem. He just took you out. This isn't massacring the Christians. This isn't massacring some other country of people. This is his own people. This is why the stress on the land. And think about that. And what it's doing to the infrastructure as far as taxes. It's too expensive to farm. It's too expensive to buy food. It just gets worse and worse and worse. Now he died very dishonorably. I won't stay here long. After 9 years as emperor, he was assassinated while relieving himself along roadside. It was very dishonorable. He was just run up on and taken out very quickly. It's not like he's got some grave marking his. He was horrible, just absolutely horrible, and he was taken out very suddenly and unexpectedly. Anyway, the next one was really even worse, and he didn't last long, and he was pretty much a boy. His name was Elagabalus from 218 to 222. Now, these people, you'll probably forget about them, but they were this point at which things got really bad and continued to get bad from that point. He was very young. He was like only 17, 18 years old when he became emperor. Can you imagine putting the Roman Empire into the hands of a 17-year-old? We don't even like to give him the keys to our car, much less the Roman Empire. But he got it through this assassination. He was like the next in line, or the Praetorian Guard, or someone saw we could use this kid to do what we want. Well, it turns out he was very, very perverted sexually. There's nothing bad in this picture, but that's him up on in their parties and their free-for-alls and things like that. But he indulged himself in extreme sexual and religious perversion. I won't even begin to put on there what Edward Gibbons wrote about him, and it was absolutely horrible. And when he's supposed to be running the country, he practiced every form of perversion there was in this time that he was emperor, which was less than 2 years. And what we had here, and think about it, we had a sexually confused teenager governing the civilized world. You can imagine the stress that this puts on the world when no one's running the country who has any sense to be running the country. Could you imagine if you had a 17-year-old perverted boy sitting in the White House, running the country? How long this country would tear itself apart? It would just ruin things. Everything would go kablooey. Well, here's where the Praetorian Guard stepped in. He was 18 years old when he and his mother were assassinated, get this, conceived by his grandmother. She'd had enough of it. She took him out. See, this is horrible. And it was carried out by the Praetorian Guard. And history records that they took the two of them and just threw them into the river. It was over just like that. No, You imagine this turnover. What I'm trying to get at is the turnover in the government and how it would affect the infrastructure. For these few years, these two men stressed the land with their lavish lifestyles. But what about, there was this phrase, hurt not the oil or the wine. There's something that it only goes so far, and then it'll get some relief. And we think that possibly what that's referring to is his cousin who got the seat next, his name was Severus Alexander. Now, he was young too. You can see by the looks of him, he was very young. He was just in his 20s, but it was his cousin that was the perverted one. Alexander did much to improve the morals of the conditions of the people and enhance the dignity of the state, and he favored Christianity. So you see, you get this relief in there where if it was to keep going, the empire would dissolve quicker than God has into his plan for it to dissolve, because there's a time when that day will come. Excessive luxury and extravagance at the imperial court were diminished. He took a lot of that away. He was very good with the books, so to speak. He knew how to get things back in line. But think about the Praetorian Guard, who was making a lot of money and their pay and things like that off all these high taxes. So they didn't like that, and you can read more of the history, but his downfall came when he tried to bribe the invading Germanic tribes rather than fight them, and his legionaries found this very dishonorable and assassinated him. Those that were right around him, that he just would rather bribe the enemy than get into a fight. Well, they didn't want that. That you don't do that. We didn't come up as soldiers to bribe the enemy, so they didn't like it. Well, that was a turning point again. Now, this is not recorded in the scriptures so much, but it's called the crisis of the 3rd century, also known as the military anarchy or the imperial crisis in AD 235 to 284, was a period in which the Roman Empire nearly collapsed under the combined pressures of invasion, civil war, plague, and economic depression. And the last horse that we'll get to, which we'll cover next week, will show us that unfolding. The crisis began with the assassination of the Emperor Alexander Severus at the hands of his own troops, initiating a 50-year period in which 20 to 25 claimants to the title of the emperor, mostly prominent Roman army generals, assumed imperial power over all or part of the empire. So you could see they were coming and going very quickly. No one could stay in power very long. All right, we'll stop there. The fourth seal. What I wanted to say was what we're going to see when we get into this fourth seal is that the seal actually seems to extend the Spirit even 20 years more. And we're going to see some of the, not just the fighting within, but the disease and hardships that fell upon the Roman world, which was, and the Christians suffered through it too. I mean, it wasn't like Israel where it didn't happen to them. They went through it also. So our brethren of that day struggled through these times. Those that did have the knowledge of the truth were going through all this. And imagine living in that time. Because the brethren lived right on through all this. Those who believed the truth, who John passed it on to, and all, they were going through all this. And imagine the fear of the Praetorian Guard and these emperors in place who would just, if they'd wipe out their own people, how much more would they wipe you out? Without a second thought of if he was offended. So we've run over. I'm sorry. But I wanted to finish that. Next week we will get into the fourth seal, which is he says, "And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and Hell followed with him." So it doesn't look like it's getting any better, does it? So we'll go ahead and stop there, and we'll pick up with this guy next week. Thank you very much.